vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweating working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the work sprinklers on, alright. Well, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to the Drafting the Circuits radio program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about everything in racing. Joining me today is my good friend Gray Warren, Seth Eggert, and Richard Youden. How is everybody tonight?
Doing great.
Good.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, so it is officially the month of May. The month of May always kind of culminates with the Indianapolis 500 and the World 600, but the start of the month of May is always a time where we remember Ayrton Senna, who lost his life on May 1st, a day after Roland Ratzenberger had lost his life in a crash on a weekend that many consider to be one of the darkest weekends in motor racing history back in 1994. I remember it well. It's one of the few times I'd ever just turned the television off with a race still going on and just walked away from it because I was, visibly shaken with the events that unfolded there. But Richard, you've worked in Formula One, you've grown up in Formula One. I know you have some thoughts about Senna and look back on his career.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always a difficult, or a time of the year when everybody who's involved in Formula One remembers the legacy and the sort of gift that Senna gave everybody that follows motorsport. For a while there, I actually worked for the Williams team, and there was a auditorium named after him that we'd often meet in. And actually, on the 1st of May, quite regularly there'd be flowers left outside the team factory there in the UK. So he left a huge impression on people, and I knew guys that were on the team that day who were actually at Imola that weekend when he's had his accident, and they've got some pretty raw and real stories to tell. But I just wanted to, I guess it's more how people and how sport impacts people's lives. At times we think of sport as a hobby or a pastime or an entertainment, and at the end of the day it is, but also it has a huge impact on people's lives. And for myself, I remember the day very, very clearly. I was 10 years old at the time, and I was just starting to sort of get into Formula One. Growing up in the UK, we'd had Nigel Mansell win in '92, and then Damon Hill was starting to come through. So I was, starting to get into the sport that day, that time, and I can still remember exactly where I was in my parents' house watching on the TV when he had his accident. And for a young kid then, it was really sort of the first real exposure I'd had to death and to mortality. Obviously, Ratzenberger had been killed the day before, but unfortunately, due to his profile and the nature of it, it wasn't covered in the depths that it should have been. Obviously, if it had been today with social media, I'm sure it'd be a lot more coverage of it. But for a young kid, it was the first time I'd ever really experienced that, and it sort of transcended the celebrity image and the the real life. It brought what you see on TV into reality. And of course, you were aware of famous people that had died before them, but you never really had that link or that connection with them. And it made a huge impact on me. And I was as a young kid, I was shaken by it. And, you look back on it now, and it was such a terrible, terrible weekend of sport. Knowing more about it now and having read books and having sort of listened to people that were there. You had Rubens Barrichello had a massive accident on the Friday, which he was incredibly lucky to walk away from. His car got airborne coming over some curbs and hit some catch fencing just head on. at 140 odd miles an hour, and he was incredibly lucky to sort of have just a broken nose from the accident. And then, of course, Roland Ratzenberger had his accident on the Saturday in qualifying, which unfortunately cost him his life. And then at the start of the race on the Sunday morning, I'm guessing it would be, I know it was one of the Benetton, so it must have been JJ Leto, I think it was at the time. Or was it? It could have been him or Jos Verstappen.
Leto sounds right, yeah.
So yeah, he was hit by, I think it was Pedro Lamy, and tyres went into the crowd, and that was actually what caused the safety car period where a lot of people blamed the drop in pressure, tyre pressure and ride heights and the like on Senna's accident. And then after all that, after the race had been stopped and was restarted, there was another accident in the pit lane where a tyre came off and bounced down and injured 3 or 4 drivers. So it was just this horrible, horrible weekend. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, you had Carl Wendlinger was, almost killed in an accident at Monaco, and later in the season, Mika Hakkinen had a huge accident in Australia. And it'd be interesting to sort of, I guess, wonder what the reaction to that sort of those events would have been like in 2019. Certainly, it would be different.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you kind of think about the era when things happen, right? When Senna died, and also you can also draw a parallel to when Dale Earnhardt Sr. died.
Of course,
right?
That's the biggest.
These are 2 guys who were they're not supposed to die.
Bigger
right?
than the sport.
They're
bigger than the sport.
Bigger than the sport, and Roland Ratzenberger, yes, it's tragic.
Yeah.
And
it's
not good for the sport, but something like a Senna. But if you backtrack 20 years from there, it was commonplace for the biggest guys in the sport to lose their lives. I think as a generation, like now, the last fatality in Formula One was Senna, all the way up to Jules Bianchi.
Yeah.
It was recently. So you have a whole generation now that's just desensitized. They're not used to. So if something like that were to happen today, it would be utterly shocking. So,
yeah. And you had
up in on this conversation too. Then sure we could circle back to you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like you said, utterly shocking. That brings to mind, at least for me, when it comes to IndyCar. More recently, Justin Wilson and Dan Weldon. But going back to Senna, if you've ever watched the documentary one on, I want to say it's on Netflix, going through the history of Formula One, there's a part on it in which they talk about not only Senna, but the safety car driver that day, which, if I remember correctly, was Max Angelelli, who went on to fame in IMSA and sports cars. And he talked about, after seeing the wreck and what had happened, that's what drove him to sports car racing and an enclosed cockpit instead of going the open wheel route that he had intended on going.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, it certainly shook the sport to a core, and you saw by the reaction, there was a real. I think the difference that you saw, what you see now and post Senna and post Bianchi, is the sport react. That they if you look at a car from 94 compared to a car from 96, the driver protection area is infinitely different. I mean, you could see the driver's shoulders in 94. You get nowhere near that now. They put all the head and neck support around and the foam around the driver's head. But then when you lost other drivers of arguably equal talent and skill as Senna, you look at Gilles Villeneuve, and I think arguably the greatest driver that's ever lived was Jim Clark. And there was that was really bad. Okay, next race. Nobody reacted to it. They just got on with it because, as you mentioned earlier, Frank, it's accepted. And it's totally different now. It's we don't accept these things, and society as a general doesn't accept them, which is a good thing. Goodness me, don't
Oh,
get
it's a
me wrong,
good thing, yeah,
good.
yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
it traces back to guys like Jackie Stewart, who was he's
The pioneer, yeah.
the pioneer
And-
of trying to tell the track owners, the series, and the team owners that, hey, drivers are not a disposable commodity, because that's how they were treated. They said, okay, well, we lost this guy to somebody waiting in line for his spot, and
Yeah.
I think my favorite quote from Jackie Stewart is, I pioneered for safety, and it didn't make me a popular champion. He goes, you know what? He says, I could have stayed in the sport. I might be dead, but I'd be much more popular. You know? So, instead, he felt that campaigning for that drivers, we're not.
But there's always been something to be learned from fatality in motorsports. I go back to my early fandom back in the mid '60s, and we lost heroes like Fireball Roberts and Joe Weatherly. But I can honestly say, in some of the more higher profile fatalities from the mid '60s, again, Fireball Roberts, Joe Weatherly, Jimmy Purdue, their deaths also created change within our sport. The fuel cell and the safety top to the fuel cell came in after Fireball, and then you had the safety inner liner in the tires that came after Jimmy Pardue's death. Also, the submarine belt, Joe Weatherly's death, the shoulder harness became mandatory. So those things came along and were positive changes after their deaths. And then later on in the sport, we went through another dark period when we lost Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin, and even Dale Earnhardt in a short span. But we learned something else from those. We learned about the basal skull fracture, and then that led to the development of the Hans device and the neck restraints and things like that we have today. And it's like the march of time. The cars became technologically better and faster and opened up essentially a can of worms, that led to other fatalities that we had to learn from and overcome. So it's been that way, all through motorsports. In my opinion, of course, like I said, there was some eras where drivers were treated as disposable commodities, but change was on the horizon.
Yeah. Right, now, Richard, you've got just a few more points on this.
Yeah.
And then I guess there were some races last week we need to talk about. But I want you to get all your thoughts out, though.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Sort of today, obviously, it's the day when you sort of read up on, you read little sound bites on Senna. And I think one guy that often gets overlooked for the contribution he made to safety, not just in Formula One and sport, but in general automotive, and I think it impacts everybody's lives on almost a daily basis, is Professor Sid Watkins. Him and Ayrton were very, very close friends. And actually, there was, in one of Sid Watkins' books, he was talking about the weekend in Imola, and on the Saturday evening, him and Ayrton had dinner. And, they were talking about, hey, let's just pack this in. Don't race tomorrow. Let's just pack it in, go fishing. Nobody will blame us, and we'll leave this all behind. And, they never got a chance to do that. They never got that option. And the work that Sid Watkins did for sport is amazing. And if there's anybody out there, who wants a couple of good books to read that are really fascinating reads, Sid Watkins wrote two. He did, the first book was called Life at the Limit, published in the, I'm going to say mid-90s, early 90s, and then he did another book called Beyond the Limit, which was like a follow-up, which were two fantastic books there. And the last point I wanted to sort of raise on this was, it's not only is it tragic that, within 8 years or 7 years of each other, Formula One and NASCAR lost their icons of Dale Earnhardt and Ayrton Senna, but it shows what trust that these drivers put into the mechanics and the engineers. And I mean, for both of those accidents, there was a lot of debate on, the safety Was the safety of both of those cars compromised? I know there was a lot of conjecture over Ayrton's steering column, and similar for some of Dale Earnhardt's seatbelts. And at the end of the day, these guys, personally, I don't believe that there should be any sort of prosecution or any sort of criminal charges against the death in motor racing. At the end of the day, these guys go out there and they entrust their lives in the work of the mechanics and designers and engineers that go along with it. And they deserve, they know the risks. Whenever, as soon as they put that helmet on and step inside that car, it's a dangerous game, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Absolutely. So this weekend we had Formula One was in Baku in Azerbaijan. We had predicted a pretty wild race, and we didn't quite get it. It was a little bit of a letdown by the time race day come. But again, another Mercedes 1-2. This time Valtteri Bottas in the number one spot, his second win of the year. The Cup guys were in Talladega with a whole new look to Talladega racing. And Chase Elliott came home the winner of a Chevrolet. Kind of banded together to try to get themselves a win and keep the Fords and Toyotas out. And I heard that the word from Chevrolet is, we don't care who wins, you guys work together and make sure we get a Chevrolet out front. And it was Chase Elliott to the front. So Gray, Seth, what did you guys think about the racing at Talladega this weekend? It was quite a bit different than what we're used to, but still quite entertaining, I thought.
It reminded me a lot of the Talladega races back in the early 2000s when they were actually able to make runs in the draft within a lap or two. It didn't take 5, 6, 7, 10 laps just to make a run. And Chevrolet, I will say, put down that edict or that suggestion after Hendrick had made a deal in the 500 to work with Gibbs, a Toyota team. So I think the Chevy reps may have been a little peeved at that back in February, but I digress a little bit. Anyway, you didn't have the massive field-destroying wrecks. Yes, we did have some big wrecks, or major wrecks, but it didn't have more than 5 or 6 cars, which is a little bit more reminiscent, like I said, of the early 2000s. Granted, there were a handful of races in which we had the giant wrecks. 2001 comes to mind when Bobby Labonte and Tony Stewart flipped at Daytona and Talladega. But there were also a lot of times in which we had just big 4 or 5 car wrecks back then.
I think the term "the big one" actually dates back to 1974, if I'm not mistaken, in a wreck that one of the very first big ones at Talladega. And I believe that's the one that gave Wendell Scott career-ending injuries. 73. Okay, yeah, I knew that. Talladega is famous for the big one, which we don't have one every year. And now, if we had a big one this year, that was quite a spectacular tumble there that young Kyle Larson took there. That was scary to watch.
It reminded me a lot of Ricky Rudd's wreck at Daytona years ago. It also reminded me of Jamie McMurray's wreck in practice last year. It was a very slow and lazy liftoff, but once he got airborne, he tumbled. I know NASCAR is looking into that, and they might change the tapered spacer size slightly just to try to keep speeds down. What they had done between the first and second practice with the wicker on the spoiler, it wasn't to keep the overall speeds down, it was to keep the RPM speeds down. Because in the first practice, out of the 40 attempting or running the race, 36 had RPMs sustained over 9,600.
Okay, now Gray or Richard, you're more of the technical sort than Seth Rice. So sustaining more than 9,000 RPMs. What are we looking at there? We're just talking about blowing up engines left and right.
You're looking at some very, very hot engines and a very, very short race.
Yeah.
Okay.
They allowed them a 2 gear selections, and that was another change. They allowed them to go to another gear after it. And I tell you, I thought, to me, this was one of the better Talladega races I've seen in a good while. I thought the competition was good. I thought there was a lot of side-by-side racing back through the field and up front. I think it was pretty well received. The cars had some throttle response, had a little bit of power. They could, like Seth alluded to, they could get a run, and they could actually pass. I think they hit on something there. I think maybe they can tweak a little bit, but don't do anything really drastic, because I think that they've got a good package for the remaining two, if you want to call them plate races or restrictor plate races or super speedway races that they're going to have. We go back to Daytona in July and then Talladega again in the fall. So I think they've hit on something. I thought it was a pretty good show overall, and a good crowd there to support it.
There was a good crowd Saturday for the Xfinity race too, which I thought was refreshing, because we're used to seeing Xfinity with, empty grandstands, but there are a lot of folks there on Talladega on Saturday. So
Talladega is good. Talladega is well received, and usually they're going to have good crowds there for the entire weekend.
Chase Elliott was the first driver to win a Talladega race without a plate.
Since his father did.
Who was the last? That's right. Who was the last one? Exactly.
Bill Elliott back in 1987.
Right, and that's when he set some records for qualifying at Talladega. Right, qualifying lap is what, 2:12, 2:13.
Actually, he had set that record in the spring race, I believe, the first race, not the second one.
Yeah, but as a direct reaction to those speeds, right?
Well,
is where the restrictor plates come from. They feel like they need to slow the cars down on these larger tracks. Correct?
And also Bobby Allison's wreck into the catch fence as well.
Right. Now we saw some pretty good speeds here in practice, and I know they felt like they wanted to slow them down. We had guys hitting 204, 205.
204 was the max.
Yeah, but even in race trim during the race, there were a couple of race laps that, right at 200.
Well, the fastest lap of the race was actually by Brendan Gaughan, who finished 8th. And it was when he and a few others had drifted away from the pack because they thought a wreck was coming, and they decided they wanted to get closer to the pack. His lap time was 2:10.
Really?
Wow.
In race trim during the race?
Yes.
That's good stuff. Yeah, and they wanted to slow him down at 204. Wow.
And yeah, they want to slow him down at 204. And Brendan Gaughan actually had told a story, the post-race. That's the fastest he's gone since the Truck Series in 2002 at Daytona, for a lap time that no longer exists because NASCAR erased the timing and scoring from that practice session because they did not want people to know the trucks went 2:16 at Daytona.
Wow. That was the first year they took the plates off the trucks, right? I remember when they did that.
Yeah.
And that's somebody had a horrible wreck in a truck that race. One of the Bodines, I believe.
Jeffrey Bodine, that was in 2000.
Right. Yeah, I remember that well. Yeah, I remember that was a scary looking wreck. So, all right. So, Xfinity and trucks both ran this weekend, or just Xfinity?
It was Xfinity and ARCA.
And ARCA, and our Xfinity winner was
Tyler Reddick in a beat up car. What else is new?
What else is new? Yep. So let's talk about Xfinity and trucks for a moment, and then we'll start to begin the preview. The next week in the month of May, we got some Formula One to talk about, and we'll move forward. So, Xfinity and trucks, Seth, Gray.
Well, Gray, I'll let you lead this one.
Well, I mean, Tyler Reddick has knocked on the door all season long. Has had had a number of top 5 finishes and just hasn't been able to close the deal. And this time he was. He's a pretty good plate racer on the speedways, and of course he had some trouble early on and pancaked the side a little bit there, but was able to recover from that and have a car that could compete up front late in the race. I thought, some of the racing there, inside the last 10 laps got kind of hairy. It was a lot of blocking going on, and I thought I was sitting on the edge of my seat thinking, well, there's going to be a big wreck here in a minute. Somebody's not going to give Tyler. Was really mirror driving a lot there to keep the field behind him, and a couple of times he had a couple of close shaves moving up to block, and I thought that maybe as they got deeper into the race and got down within a few laps of the finish that somebody wasn't going to cut him any slack, and he was going to end up turning himself into the fence, but he was able to pull it off, and it was pretty exciting finish. He held the guys at bay and was able to collect his first win of the season.
And we very nearly had a upset winner in Gray Gaulding, driving one of Bobby Dollar's cars. He finished second with sponsorship from Panini Trading Cards and the NASCAR Racing Experience. Mind you, he finishes second, qualifies for the Dash for Cash at Dover, and their Dover sponsor bails on them.
Well, they win the cash then because they need it now.
And on top of that, that's the best finish ever for Bobby Dollar's team. First top 5, let alone top 10 for Gray Gaulding. We also had Josh Williams earn his first top 10. And Chris Cockrum finished in the top 10 for the first time.
Well, good for them. So I was watching the end of that Xfinity race, and to Gray's point about the blocking, because there was some tremendous blocking going on, and all I could think about was poor Graham Rahal losing third place the other week with the blocking call that was so mild compared to what we saw there.
They're not going to call it in NASCAR, obviously.
They don't have the same rule that IndyCar does. But
you do that at your own peril in NASCAR, and sometimes when there's still laps to be counted, the guys will cut you some slack. But you get late in the race and you pull over somebody's going to have their nose already in there, and they're not going to lift. They're going to keep driving it in, and you're going to end up turning yourself into the fence. But it worked out good for him, and like I said, it was a long overdue win for RCR. They had not had a lot of success in the Xfinity Series in the last couple of years, but were able to get back to victory lane this weekend at Talladega.
That was good stuff. So now where are we off to next?
Dover, the Monster Mile. Dover, the place with the coolest trophy in the world. So who do we like for Dover, guys? Richard, I'll let you go first.
Jimmy Johnson.
Jimmy hadn't won a race in a while, and yet there are years and years that Dover has been his personal playground, and the Chevys are
active winner there.
Well,
the Chevys are improved. So I like your pick, Richard. So
thank you.
Gray.
I'm gonna go with Kevin Harvick. Kevin's had he hadn't cracked victory lane yet, and I'm gonna say he's gonna do it, and I'm not. Stuart Haas was strong all last year. They really you've been kind of playing second fiddle a little bit this year to Gibbs and Penske. So I'm looking for Stuart Haas car, particularly the one of Harvick, to end up in victory lane.
All right, another good pick. And Seth, what are you thinking?
Well, since Richard took my pick, I'm going to go with a teammate of Jimmy's, the defending winner at Dover, Chase Elliott.
So you got Chase Elliott going 2 in a row. Good stuff there. People like Chase Elliott. And I'm going to go with a Penske car. I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. Just because Penske's been strong this year, and you guys know I like Brad. So now moving along. Now, Richard, I always introduce you to the folks as a race engineer. You've worked in Formula One before. You've worked in NASCAR. Lately, you've been between jobs, but you were at the racetrack this weekend.
I was, yeah.
For Park Place Motorsports, Porsche Cayman in the Blaupunkt World Challenge Series, which is we've had a couple of folks from that series on our show. Recently had Jared Andretti, Spencer Pomelli, Derek DeBoer all on the show. So you got to something new for you. I mean, you've not worked in that series before. It's a little hard to follow. There's like 17 different classes and 7 different schedules.
Yes.
But whenever I watch it, I find the racing to be quite entertaining. But now tell us a little bit about your weekend there with the race team.
Oh boy, yeah, it was a long weekend. I mean, for a start, it was at one of the best tracks thing in the country at the Virginia International Raceway. What a place that is! I'd seen it on TV and I'd seen races from there, but I'd never been there in person. And it's a pretty cool racetrack. It really is. It's what it's one of those racetracks that is there for the love of the sport. Really, it's not pretentious. It's not built up. It's the people that go there because they love watching racing, and it's normally pretty entertaining. So, for myself, it was the first time working in with one of these endurance cars for a long time, and it was fascinating to see the setup of these teams. They're relatively small teams. There's maybe 7 or 8 mechanics and engineers per car, and the Park Place Motorsport, who I was working with, they had 2 cars for the weekend. The GT4 subset, if you like, of the Pirelli World Challenge is split into 2 halves. There's the Sprint category and the Sprint X. And I still don't know the difference.
I think the Sprint X, you have a driver change, and the Sprint, you don't.
I think it could be the other way around. I'm not sure.
Maybe it's the other way around,
whichever way it goes. Yeah, whichever way it goes. So one of them you have a pro driver and an amateur driver, and the other series was just purely the amateur driver.
Right,
so,
right.
We were set up. So in the course of the weekend, there was 4 races in total, and there was 2 races on Saturday, 2 races on the Sunday. We had a interesting weekend, should we say? First race on Saturday, there we think was an issue with curbing on one part of the track, in that out of the maybe 20 cars that were in the race, probably 8 or 9 have suffered from rear left punctures. Unfortunately, we were one of the teams that came victim to that. So the amateur driver there, who was Alan, I'm going to struggle to pronounce his surname, I'm sorry, Alan, Brynjolfsson, I think is how his name is pronounced. I'm really sorry if it's not. He finished mid-pack after running reasonably strongly at the start of the race there. So that was a little bit frustrating. Second race of the day, Alan started in the car as the amateur driver, and then was due to hand over to Trent Hinman, who was the pro driver for Park Place. Very, very good young driver. A lot of experience for such a young age. Unfortunately, we suffered from an engine issue prior to that, which required an engine change in that car. So that was a long evening, Saturday evening. Thankfully, from my point of view, I'm not an engine guy, but there was some of the guys who were up till 2:00 in the morning on Sunday getting that fixed. So there was a DNF in race 2 there. Race 3 on the Sunday morning, we came victim again to tyre gremlins on that rear left, which was despite them doing some work to the track and grinding off some of the curbing, we still became victim to that. And then race 4 of the day, of the weekend, was the final race for the whole event. And Trent started off again in the 2-driver car there. With the engine change in that car, instead of starting on pole, which is where he'd qualified, he started back in 10th. But he was carving through that field and I think got about 4th or 5th, and then started to have braking issues. And unfortunately, by the time he handed the car over to Alan, the brakes had failed, and at one point going down into turn 1, he just lost the rear brakes totally and made contact with the wall, which was a great shame, really, because it's a good group of guys, good team, 2 very, very good drivers. Alan, as an amateur driver, is very, very, very capable, and in some places was faster than some of the pro drivers. Hard on himself. He always wanted to do better and always wanted to push the car. Trent was a great mentor and tutor to him. So they'll bounce back. They're up in Mid Ohio this weekend. They Park Place takes part in the IMSA series as well as the Pirelli World Challenge. So they're back for the IMSA series this weekend in Mid-Ohio. So hopefully they'll bounce back this weekend and have a really solid run up in Mid-Ohio. But it was good to be back at trackside. That itch was certainly well and truly scratched. It was a long weekend, tiring weekend, but there's certainly something to be said for it. Not one person on the team had any qualms at any point in time about swapping the engine on that car, knowing full well it would be pretty much an all-night job. That's just not how they work. They're committed, they go for it, and they do it for the love of the sport. And hopefully, in the not too distant future, I'll be back out at another racetrack with those guys, helping them out.
All right, well, sounds good. I wish you the best with them. Hope that what you're adding to the team that they find beneficial. So
that's the plan.
Yes, that's the plan. That's the plan. Earn that paycheck, right? So,
exactly.
All right, so we have Formula One this weekend. We kind of touched on a little bit that the Azerbaijan race failed to deliver as advertised, I guess, or as as promised from the past few runs there. But there was some drama and some excitement in qualifying, and there was some just odd stuff too with who's it? George Russell ran over the manhole cover that came up and busted the bottom of his car.
Yep.
That was a scary looking video. That whole thing could have gone very badly.
Well, it was similar to an incident that Haas had in Malaysia, I think with Roman Grosjean a couple of years ago, where he just ran over a drain and ripped half the car apart. Now, I believe Haas got compensation from that. I'm sure these teams have insurance. The circuit, the venues have insurance. But for a brand new tub, you're looking in the millions of dollars in terms of compensation there, and you could argue loss of performance as well. Because they lost. He missed out on FP2. So it was a bad weekend for Williams all over. We've been saying that for the last 2 years, it feels like.
It's a bad decade for Williams right now.
Yeah, it has been. And, they had, and then Kubica had his accident in qualifying. And, they're really struggling with the tyres. And it was an interesting comment that George Russell made. He said, it's hard for Williams to get the tyres working because the tyres are designed for the top three cars. And I think Haas are seeing that as well. Haas are openly saying they're the worst team when it comes to long-run performance versus short-run performance. You often see Magnussen and Grosjean qualifying, top 12, top 10, top 8, or whatever it may be. And then they're running 15th, 16th in the race. They really struggle to, what's the phrase they use, turn on the tyres, as it were. So there's an interesting comment by George, and there may well be something in it. Obviously, Pirelli want to make a tyre that suits every team, but the big teams are the ones that shout loudest when they look at what they want to work with. And of course, you saw Charles Leclerc crash out in Q2, I think it was, which is a real shame for the kid. Hey, he's 21, 22. He's going to make these mistakes. And the most important thing for him is he's not too hard on himself. He'll win races, he'll get more pole positions, more fastest laps, and all this sort of stuff. So there's no shame in what happened to him there last weekend. Obviously, the spotlight's on him a little bit, but and arguably that cost Ferrari the race because Vettel, they didn't have that tandem run in qualifying, so Vettel could only qualify third. They weren't able to benefit from the slipstream down the long, start-finish straight, which is a mile and something long, isn't it? So arguably they struggled there, whereas Mercedes were able to run with that slipstream effect there. So you could argue that unfortunately Charles' mistake there had huge ramifications for the rest of the weekend. That just shows the fine margins that Formula One works in. Should that one incident cause so much trouble throughout the rest of the race weekend? No, I think the series should be set up so that you can make a mistake and still recover. But as we all know, Formula One is working in points of 1% scales here.
Certainly. So now let's talk about the front of the field. So Valtteri take his second win of the year.
Yep.
And as predicted by one of you guys here, think that was you, Richard. No, that was Joey.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
That was Joey. You say
Joey snuck in there and stole that.
Right, yeah. I mean, not that we disagree with Joey, but so Valtteri, took the race to Lewis Hamilton.
Yep.
So you feel like we might see a battle for the championship shaping up between the Mercedes teammates, like we did a few years ago when
Rosberg was there.
Rosberg took the fight to Lewis and won.
I mean, it's the potential, and I must admit, we have our little group chat going on, and Seth made a comment, post race that Mercedes looked delighted when Valtteri won, didn't they? They just didn't, like,
yeah.
Oh, the camera's on us, we need to cheer. That was quite telling. I'm sure everybody in Mercedes knows which way their bread's buttered, sort of thing, should we say? They definitely are pro Lewis, and hopefully, that doesn't hurt Lewis. He's got to rise to that challenge. And Lewis argued, I was very surprised that Lewis, after seeing the start, Lewis didn't make that move down into turn 1 or turn 2. I thought he got a better start than Bottas and was in a position to make the move. Maybe he just lost a little bit of traction on the inside of turn 1 there and couldn't accelerate in the same way that he would have liked. But at the end of the day, he was outdriven. Again, these cars are so balanced, and you're not driving as fast as you can in these cars. You're managing the race and managing the tyres. And I think that, Valtteri just drove better than Hamilton did. And again, it's when your teammates like that, whoever gets to the first corner first will typically finish ahead when they can control a race in that manner.
Yeah, I'm just, kind of pleased with the fact that Mercedes, as dominant as they are, will allow the battle between because if you look at the Ferrari Michael Schumacher era, right? It's like, get this Eddie Irvine out of here. I don't want a guy who'd like to win. You know what I mean? Go ahead, give me Rubens Barrichello or Nigel Mansell at Williams. Say, give me Riccardo Patrese, who's fine finishing second to me.
Yeah.
And then I'll gift him a win every now and again. So it's refreshing to see Valtteri having 2 wins, Valtteri Bottas having 2 wins this early in the season, even though Lewis is ahead by several points. But it's
Valtteri's ahead now.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Valtteri's ahead because he's got his. They both had 2 wins in 2 seconds, but Valtteri had that fastest lap in Melbourne, so he's
right.
He's ahead by a point.
Yeah, so they're locked in. But let's talk about Lewis and the record books, okay? Because it's amazing how fast he's piled up wins. We have a longer season, and he's with quite a dominant team, right? So he's at 75 Grand Prix wins now. He's been averaging 10 to 11 race wins per year for the last couple years. That's puts him a year and a half away from passing Michael Schumacher for number 1 on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Does that blow your mind or what? When I was watching the race, I thought nobody would catch Jackie Stewart's 27 wins.
No,
I thought that record was unbreakable. And then Alan Prost. Then I thought nobody will break Alan Prost having 50 wins. And then Michael Schumacher comes along. So nobody's going to Schumacher's 90-some wins. And Lewis is on pace to pass the 100-win mark.
Oh, yeah, and it is interesting, actually. It's quite poignant that, I'll go back to, Senna on this topic. He won 40-odd races. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. But there was something about the way he did it. There was that... Senna had this arrogance, but he also had this sort of South American flair and this flamboyantness about him, and people didn't really mind him winning, and people didn't really, because he was such a character and he was such a icon.
With style.
Yeah,
you have there's a little bit of revisionist history right here, Richard. There were people that minded Senna winning quite a bit.
May well have done. May well be, yeah.
I mean, the same thing with Dale Earnhardt has been sainted. But there when he was active driver, there were people that couldn't stand him. And Senna was a
He
loved him
was,
or he was a
yeah, for
polarized,
sure he
love
was.
him or hate
For
him
sure
kind
he
of guy.
was.
Yeah, so
But you look at the way Lewis is going.
fans liked him winning.
But you look at the way Lewis is going about it, and I mean, hey, you can't discredit his record by no stretch of the imagination. But there's something that's not there. If you know, I can't think of the word. There's something.
The thing that's missing, the element that's missing from Lewis is the competition. The utter dominance of Mercedes during this era is what it is. I mean, really,
and I think
he's not had the competition to deal with. I mean, basically, you haven't seen him, more than drive through the field and come back and win. Typically, the vast majority of his races have been, from the front row.
Mm-hmm.
He's dominated.
It's interesting you mentioned that. And I think it's a lot to do with the way the cars are designed and the cars work these days.
Sure, it's a different era.
You look at when Senna was winning. He was sliding. And guys like Gilles Villeneuve as well. They were sliding the cars around the corner, and they were on the edge.
They were still shifting, and they didn't have paddles to shift with. They were shifting with, their right hand. And stuff like that.
And they'd miss a gear change. I mean, I don't think that's happened in the last 20 years in Formula One. A driver's missed a gear change. Mm-hmm. But
I mean, that's the people think that's an urban legend. That missed a gear change. What does that mean?
Yeah,
I don't know. But
you look at you look at some of Senna's records, and this is where I think he was on a different level to Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
And Schumacher was the same as well. You look at, the two examples I'm going to give here. The very, very famous one for Senna, of course, is Monaco 88, I think it was.
Yeah.
When he got pole at Monaco by 1.5 seconds. And he beat his teammate, who was a guy called Alain Prost. Now, I don't know if he ever did anything in Formula One. But by 1.5. That's like Hamilton beating, Bottas by 2 seconds, if you put them in comparison, because Bottas is no Alain Prost. That is the margin there. I mean, you just never see it these days because of the way the cars work. Now, that's not to say that Hamilton couldn't do that in those cars, but it's the whole thing about comparing eras and what have you.
Yeah,
but
you're not.
And then you look at Schumacher.
Apples and oranges.
Yeah, again, a famous sort of point from Schumacher's ability was 1999. So he'd had an accident at Silverstone earlier in the year and broke his leg and missed a third, maybe half of the season, and was not in no position to win the championship when he returned in Malaysia. But Eddie Irvine, his teammate, had the opportunity to win that championship. And Schumacher goes out in his first qualifying session after injury and sets pole by a second. I mean, it was just utterly dominant. And this guy had been in bed for 6 months with a broken leg. Mm-hmm. There's just something, Hamilton, through no fault of his own, I don't think, hasn't had the opportunity to display the, I don't know what the word is. I'm struggling with the word.
Mystique. To Gray's point, he starts on the front row and leads every lap because he's very fortunate to be, where he is and who he's employed by, but he's not there by mistake either.
Well, he's a generational.
No, exactly. He's earned the right.
Right.
He's earned the right to be in that position.
He is a generational talent.
For sure.
Exactly.
In his era, and I think that generational talents their skills would work in any era. You could take them back to another era, and they could adapt and drive those cars. It's just so, like, I think Senna today could adapt and drive these cars. We have the same. We talk about Kyle Busch today, driving back in the era of David Pearson and Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison. I for one, believe that he's a generational talent that could succeed and excel in any era. And I think people like Hamilton and Senna and Clark and Stewart and Schumacher, all those guys could succeed in any era based
Mm-hmm.
on just their talent.
Yeah.
All right, so good. So where's Formula One off to next? Do we have a week off?
Barcelona.
Barcelona.
Yep. For the
And some
start of the
news
European season.
Right, and then this will be the last race at Barcelona for the immediate future, right? Because we're bringing the Dutch Grand Prix back on next year, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Richard?
Potentially, there's been some talk about that. Now it's
So it's not official yet?
no, I don't think so. I mean, Barcelona is one of a number of tracks that is coming to the end of its contract with the Formula One governing body there, and it's maybe like the old thing Bernie used to do back in the day. He'd sort of spread a rumor that another track was going to come in and take somebody else's slot to increase the price of the race weekend from the Formula One standpoint. But you do have to look at Barcelona now. It's never been the greatest race for a long, long time. I can't remember a good Spanish Grand Prix. And with Alonso not there anymore, it's struggling to sell tickets. Even before Alonso came along, I remember it was in doubt, and he sort of pretty much single-handedly saved that race. So it obviously makes sense now that he's not around for it to be questionable. I mean, I'm sure it still get used as a pre-season testing venue, and I think World Superbikes and the World Touring Cars will still go there. But
now Zandvoort, am I saying that right?
That'll do.
Close enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with Max Verstappen doing well, you've got
Exactly.
a built-in superstar there. But I mean, the track hasn't hosted Grand Prix cars in a number of years, and
no.
we're going to have to put some serious money into some upgrades to the track and some of the curbing, and certainly in the pit lane and garages just to get that up to Formula One snuff. So
and they're talking about next year. So I mean, there's a lot of work to do there. I mean, there was
a lot of work.
Max Verstappen did a Red Bull demo day there, and there's the onboard camera from him driving around there on YouTube, I believe. And it's a little bit on the narrow side. It really is,
Yeah.
And those barriers are awfully close. And I remember, Charlie Whiting late last year, he inspected the track purely from we could hold a race here. That was the track. That wasn't the facilities. That wasn't the infrastructure. That wasn't the medical ability. So again, I think what you'll end up seeing is Barcelona maybe extend by a year or two, and Zandvoort come in eventually. There's obviously the demand from the Dutch fans there, and it's a convenient location from for the German, French, the British fans to come over. It's not a million miles away, so I think it'd be a good venue to go to and to have if they could get it up to spec.
If they get up to spec, for sure. So now is Barcelona this coming weekend, or do we have a week off?
It's next weekend. So it's the 12th.
It's on Mother's Day.
Yes. Well, in the US it is. In Europe it's not Mother's Day.
Right. Well, okay. Well, we live in we're in the USA.
Yeah, I know.
These colors don't run, Richard. So, I just love to quote Ricky Bobby. So, all right, we've got a few minutes left, but it is the month of May, and things are underway for the Indianapolis 500. They began the process of renaming all the downtown streets after the drivers. You can check certain drivers' social media pages there, where you see them placing their names over the street signs. It's a couple of great pictures of Tony Kanaan putting Kanaan Avenue up there where he's holding his son. They've also applied the giant decals to the downtown Marriott. I don't know if you guys have been down there through Indianapolis or seen pictures of the JW Marriott downtown Indianapolis, but they always decorate the whole. It's a large skyscraper size hotel made of blue glass that holds giant decals just fine, and they always put up something for a giant Indianapolis 500 logo to welcome folks coming into town and reminding them that #this is May. #this is May, this is Indy. And so the entry list for the 500 was released today. So there are 36 cars entered. 2 drivers TBA, and one of those is the number 77 Schmidt-Peterson car, which, the popular thought is that's going to go to Oriol Servia, and the other TBA is the Yukos Racing car, which is going to go to Kyle Kaiser by default, unless somebody comes in with the checkbook and says, "I'd like to run that car." So, but yeah, Richard, I don't know what that was. So,
yeah, that was my bad.
So, it just sounded like a little ringtone or something. I don't know. It was cute. So, but I digress.
This is a live show. No, it's not a live show, actually.
Live, yeah. So we've got the IndyCar drivers have tested on the oval. They've had a quick test on the road course. There have been some weather hasn't been cooperating, but there's another. The road course will be up and running. The Indianapolis Grand Prix is on May 11th, the day before Mother's Day, and then everyone will convert their Grand Prix cars over to oval cars, and racing, practice the month of May will commence. Culminating qualifying on the 18th and the 500 at the end of the month there on Memorial Day weekend. So, am I
quick? Am I right in saying that Alonso isn't running the road course?
Alonso isn't running the road course. You are absolutely correct. They're doing the 500 only effort.
Why not? That doesn't make any sense, really. It's like
it saves them the trouble of having to either, have 2 cars, or I'm sure they have 2 cars, because they have a spare.
Yeah.
They don't have to convert the one back over. I'd love to see
McLaren's budget is a little bit on the slim side, isn't it?
Yeah, no, they're just, yeah.
Their budget for the 500 for Alonso is probably bigger than some of the IndyCar's teams for the full season.
I'll guarantee it is. Yeah, I'll guarantee they're putting more into the Indy 500 than Ed Carpenter or Dale Coyne put into the full season, sure. But
Yep.
yeah, I don't know why Alonso isn't running the Grand Prix, but there are. There's always these guys that you wonder that they make a 500 deal. Why don't they just throw in the Grand Prix? Like Castro Neves for sure. He'll be doing both. He's doing the Grand Prix and the 500. And that's all he gets to do outside of his IMSA commitments with Penske.
Yeah.
But a lot of these other James Davison has got a one-off for the 500. I'd love to see him in the Grand Prix too.
Because he's a road racer.
He's a good.
That's his speciality. It's like
of
the
now,
two
Seth,
that is an option.
Davison, right? You've talked with him a bit, Seth.
I have on occasion via iRacing.
Oh, okay. All right. I was going to say you had talked to him some, but I've talked to Davison too, and the guy's a good road racer. But this Indy only deal. I mean, I guess when you bring that check for, I've got this sponsor interested in the Indy 500, they say, yeah, we'll put all that money into the 500 car, which makes sense if you think about it. So the Grand Prix field will be comprised largely of just the series regulars and Helio Castroneves. I don't believe that there are too many of the other ones. The Indy, the added, like Hildebrand's not going to be there, nor will Sage Karam. They're all just focused on the 500 only. So I don't know, but I like the Indy Grand Prix. I think it's a really fun event. If you want to experience the Indy 500 atmosphere without the 400,000 people there, go to the Grand Prix weekend. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot more access. They have an autograph session just like they do before the 500. If you're into hunting autographs, all the lines for the concessions and the gift shops are considerably shorter. You can go take your time in the museum. And the museum, by the way, unveiled the Mario Andretti Icon exhibit today, May 1st. That exhibit opened up. They've got some really neat stuff in there, including Mario's Lotus 79 that he won the World Championship with. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Mario's Indy winners in there too. You've got some of his Newman Haas cars, one of the Viceroy cars, their Vels Parnelli cars. It's just loaded up with good Mario Andretti stuff. So they always have a rotating theme. Last year was AJ Foyt, or 2 years ago was AJ Foyt. Last year was the youngsters. So, yeah, if you're in the Indianapolis area, like I say, you want to do the Indy 500 without 400,000 people, go to the Grand Prix. That's my advice to you. So, guys, we've just got about a minute left in the show, so I'm just going to open it up for a final thought from everybody. I'll start with you, Gray.
Yeah, well, gonna go to Dover this weekend and see what the Cup cars do there. First time with the new package there. We'll see how that goes, and see what kind of race we get out of there on the concrete.
All right, and Seth, you have a final thought for the evening?
Just hoping that the momentum from Talladega continues for NASCAR.
And final thought from you, Richard?
Again, it's always this time of year. It's a bittersweet time of year, but the show must go on, as it were. And May is probably one of the greatest months in open wheel racing, anyway, with the Indy 500 and Monaco and places like that. It's a good month. Let's crack on with it.
Absolutely. Yep, I'm agree with you. Let's crack on with it, as you British folks say. So, but yeah, everyone. Oh yeah. For the Indy 500 faithful. Oh my gosh, everybody's like, "Is it May yet? Is it May yet? Is it May yet?" Yes, it's May. It is May. We've got the 500 to look forward to again. Like you said, we've got Dover. We've got the NASCAR All-Star Race coming up. We've got the 600, and we've got the Monaco Grand Prix all this month. So, but what we don't have is any more time for the show tonight. So I want to say good night to you, folks that tune in and listen to us. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network and thank iHeartRadio. I want to thank you, Gray, Richard, and Seth, for coming on. And until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.